Estonians and the Russians arguing about who did what in the Second World War. We can get to that. Today is the anniversary of the deportations of Estonians to Siberia in 1949. So it's a very somber day for them here. And I'm sure, I haven't looked on the Russian embassy Twitter feed today, but I'm sure they're having an argument about who did what and who deserved what in 1949. But anyway, so when you're ready, and if you'd like to say a few words, and then we can ask a few questions perhaps and see how we get on. How does that sound?
Sounds absolutely perfect.
Okay.
I now see many of your students. I see Naima. I take Naima is from Palestine. Ahlin ya Naima. And many of your students. So I'm really looking forward to a conversation, Professor. I understand that you would like it to be more interactive. But the life of a diplomat is something, and the life of a Palestinian diplomat is something else, I must say. I don't want to really dwell into my own personal story. Or how did I get there? I saw your letter of how you want us to lead this. I'd like if you allow me, I'd like the students and I to go into a conversation. It might be really much better. But in a nutshell, for a Palestinian diplomat, first of all, you know what's the difference? I'm asking your students. You know what's the difference between an ambassador and a camel? Nobody knows. It's a very difficult question. Well, the story says that a camel can work and walk for 10 days without drinking. An ambassador drink for 10 days without working. That's the joke. That's how people identify us, as not really being the most productive creatures. But of course, it's just a joke, I assure you. In effect, I spend, maybe if I have to divide it, I spend 10% of my time with the government, not to suggest the government is not important, but the government, you will have specific officials to interact with. So in terms of the number, it is very limited with the minister and the senior officials, etc., etc. Maybe 20%, roughly 20%, 30% with the parliament because of the numbers and the cross-party and the various. Another 20%, 30% with the civil society, the grassroots organizations, the human rights organizations, the private sector, and what have you, the church, the various communities, minorities, all in this category. And the rest, which is the biggest percentage, around 40%, is with the public directly, i.e., engaging in public relations with the media, direct talks like this one, and others. What distinguishes Palestinian diplomacy is that because of our particular situation, we rely heavily and we focus on public diplomacy as opposed to only official diplomacy, because our situation, our case requires public awareness, public support, solidarity, and what have you. Much of my colleagues you would see the percentage of their time maybe the other way around. They spend most of their time with the government or with the private sector, for instance, promoting business. They will have less attention on the public side of the story. We have most of the attention on the public side of the story. And Martin, I am a very accidental ambassador, extremely accidental. I have no clue why I'm here, seriously. And I think I'm an intruder into diplomacy. I was trained as an economist all through, my undergraduate degree from Birzeit University was in economics. My master's MSc from the London School of Economics, and you can tell what did I do at the London School of Economics. I studied economics. And my PhD, also from the University of London, was in economics. So boring all along, it was economics. I was very keen on this field. And actually, upon graduation, I joined the United Nations as an economist. So I spent 3 years at Harvard as a faculty, primarily focusing on the economic side of conflict and the role of international aid in conflict resolution. So, there is a segment of diplomats, ambassadors who are described as political appointees. I might be one of those, not a professional or a career diplomat. Maybe Naima, if she follows our stories, know a little bit more. I served as a strategic advisor to President Abbas between 2015 to 2017, and before that, I was serving as a deputy of the International Affairs Commission for the Fatah PLO. And all of a sudden, Trump came around in 2017, and I found myself with a small little suitcase in the first plane to Washington. I was informed the last week of March that I will become an ambassador to Washington. So effectively, my first task as an ambassador was to be to Washington. I was 43 years old, a toddler in diplomacy, absolutely know nothing. And then my president decided to throw me in Washington with Trump. Yeah, it couldn't be more brutal, Martin. It couldn't be more brutal. And it was so brutal that I spent a year and a half in Washington, really more of being a diplomat. I was almost, a boxing fighter, a boxer, receiving hits and delivering hits for a year and a half. And then as a result of that boxing game, I was literally kicked out of Washington and our embassy was closed. I must say Trump is a bad loser. And then I was reappointed to the UK. So this is my second appointment as an ambassador to the UK. So I do not have a long career. It's been only a few years between Washington and London, two important places. And I must say I have learned few things about diplomacy and about interactions with the corridors of power. So I will leave it to the discussion, but I am enjoying the UK so much. And, this is my second incarnation in the United Kingdom. Remember, I was here as a student. And I love London, I love the UK. So I have one person to thank for being here. That is President Trump himself for closing our office and allowing me to come here and interact with a fascinating society here, fascinating academic life. So I look forward to the discussion, Martin, and I am up for it.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and for being so candid as well. We do usually, when we have diplomatic invitees or guests come along, we usually ask about their career, but I think you've addressed that very, very straightforwardly indeed.
Because of your letter.
Well, I mean, of course, what's quite interesting is there's a variety of different routes that people take into diplomacy from a variety of different angles and a variety of different postings. Of course, coming with a background in economics is I would imagine, very, very useful, but perhaps slightly different to your average diplomatic career. I'm going to abuse my position as chair just slightly to ask a couple of questions before we turn it over to the students, because I want you to interact with them, not with me. But I did want to ask about the difficulties and complications of the Palestinian position in terms of statehood and the Vienna Conventions of the 1960s. In international law, diplomats have to come from states, as you know. So this puts the Palestinian Authority, for a variety of reasons, in a slightly different category than the 192 other member nations of the United Nations. And I was wondering if you could address that a little. And also because I don't know the Middle East. My wife knows the Middle East more. She's just come back from filming in Jordan at the end of last year with, is it Ali Suleiman, the Palestinian actor? So he's just appeared in her new film. So she knows the Middle East. I don't. I'm a Central and Eastern European historian, but I've been trying to follow the Israeli elections with some difficulty, as there's 44 parties as far as I could tell. But I was wondering if you could say a little about the elections as well and what the Palestinian reaction to the new elections are in Israel. So those two very short questions just to get the ball rolling, if that's all right with you, Ambassador.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You are absolutely right that Palestine might be unique in a way that we are very one of the most active diplomatic sort of missions worldwide, one of the most vocal. Yet we have a very particular situation of not being recognized as a state by some countries. We are recognized by around 140 countries, so including in Europe. And of late, recently, Sweden has recognized the state of Palestine. The Vatican, with all the symbolism of the Pope, has recognized the state of Palestine. So we are recognized in Europe, but some European countries, including the country I am serving in now, the UK, does not recognize Palestine as a state. And therefore, we are not functioning here as a full-fledged diplomatic mission. We are not under the Vienna conventions, as you said. And this does pose severe restrictions on our work. You're absolutely right. And both, one of my jokes with my president, why do you send me to countries that do not recognize the state of Palestine? Just, send me somewhere else. It's very complicated because then, like in Washington, you cannot register anything in your name. You will be subjected to many forms of lawsuits because you are not protected by the Vienna conventions. And there are so many organizations that just are there to make your life difficult in the US and elsewhere. Your life is further complicated by inability to open bank accounts, because then you cannot prove where you are exactly. Are you an embassy, a mission, an international organization? It confuses people a lot. You are caught in the tax system. Are you paying taxes like diplomats in your original country, or like, So both in Washington and in London, the first real challenge was to try and rectify the situation and clarify it with the host countries. And it is taking some efforts with some success here in the UK and before in Washington. Countries, governments do respect us, and they treat us equally. So when I arrived, I did not present my credentials to the Queen as all my fellow ambassadors do. I presented my credentials to the Foreign Secretary. However, the Foreign Office arranged for me what they call a private audience with the Queen in the first occasion, only a few weeks after my arrival, which was in a way an informal accreditation with the Queen. And I had the pleasure and the honor of actually chatting with my fellow ambassadors, just present papers and leave. Because they want to make it up, I had the pleasure of actually chatting Her Majesty up. They try to balance it. The bottom line here is that they do not recognize the state of Palestine, but they fully recognize the government of Palestine, which is the PLO in this incident. And that's why they really, in effect, they deal with us as ambassadors. They address me as an ambassador, etc., etc. But when it comes to small little details, then it gets complicated. That's why we call for recognition from the UK, from the rest of the world, whoever did not recognize, because we believe both this will solve these issues you mentioned, Professor Brown, but also it will advance the cause of peace in the Middle East. As for the Israeli elections, I'm sure if you and the students followed yesterday's elections, there is one clear trend in this whole thing is that Israel is going further and further and further to the very extreme right wing. And to have one of the parties that have made it to the Knesset and most likely will make it to the government, the Kahanist movement, which was and is on the terrorist list of Israel. I'm not talking about the terrorist list of any other country. Israel itself considers this movement to be on the terrorist list. They are publicly a very racist, fundamentalist movement. They call themselves Jewish power. To think of such a movement to be part of the Israeli political system a few years ago was unthinkable, was simply unthinkable. But also, a few years back, to think that the settlement movement, the settler movement, would be part of the Israeli political system, the Knesset, the government, was unthinkable, but it happened. So we are moving and moving and moving every time, way more to the right. And one of the reasons, Martin, one of the main reasons, because in my opinion, the Israeli public has been always met with Israeli politicians, particularly Netanyahu, who was able to convince them that actually they can have the cake and eat it too. That he's a magician. He can do everything. Remember, he was elected in 1997 as a prime minister. So immediately after the murder of Yitzhak Rabin, who was really the most interested in a peace deal with the Palestinians. Since then, Netanyahu has been convincing large chunks of the Israeli public, increasingly, that actually the occupation could turn into a permanent situation, that he could keep the occupation, the military occupation of the occupied territories, but at the same time, build the economy, at the same time normalize with the Arab world. This brings me to your discussion, the Abrahamic Accords. At the same time, he will have the US to protect every single desire of Israel. And you remember the Trump era and the Trump plan. And regrettably, the Israeli public is following that because he's been successful. On the other hand, there is no consequences. There are no costs associated with all the illegalities. The world has not been able to actually inflict a serious cost on the Israeli public to change the calculations. So they don't feel the need or the urgency. They don't have a sense of crisis in Tel Aviv or anywhere. And they built this illegal wall, as you all may follow, deep in the West Bank. And they think, from a psychological point of view, that this conflict is behind the wall. It has nothing to do with us. And we can just go about our lives freely. So regrettably, yesterday's election has just confirmed for the fourth time in less than 2 years that the Israeli public would want to see not only a right-wing government, but even a much more right-wing government, a much further to the extreme right wing. And I assure you, this is really, really bad news, not just for the prospects of peace and two-state solution and the resolution. It's also bad news for Israel itself. I mean, having more and more forces that are very exclusive in their mentality, are very phobic of every single other creatures, is not good for Israelis, is not good for anybody in the world. And, we fear that this is not going in the right place, my friends. Without going much further into this, this explains our strategy. And our strategy is really to create a peaceful pressure on the ground in Palestine via our what we call popular resistance, which is happening on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, all over the West Bank and Gaza of late, recently, but also to leverage the international legal system, like we did with the ICC. Only a few days ago, there was a confirmation of the ICC starting investigating war crimes that has been committed in the occupied territories. We are trying to leverage all that, and we are trying to really, really create that sense of urgency among the Israeli public, and also create it bloodlessly, peacefully, non-violently, using legal mechanisms to actually change that trajectory and that tilting towards the right, and at the same time ensure that there will be some balance and equilibrium at one point in time.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes. Some questions from the floor. I mean, if you can, there should be you should be able to put your hand up, or for those who've got your camera on, you can wave, and perhaps we can get some questions to the ambassador. Would anyone have I don't want to monopolize things, but some questions about his role or name?
Naima, you need to unmute yourself.
I've just noticed, I'm sorry. Actually, I have so many questions. First, I'm going to start with a question on your Twitter account. During this course, we had to do a Twitter exercise in which we needed to scrutinize two or more or one practitioner's Twitter account and write on it. What's that? Sorry. My question to you is, regarding the language you use in your Twitter account, I noticed that none of your 2021 tweets used the Hebrew language. Is that because you are convinced in one of the theories coined by Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Chinua Achebe, which is about using the language of the occupier and not using it, or was just a coincidence? The second question regarding that Twitter account is about you following Hotefil, who's the Israeli ambassador here, and she's not following you. Is that a coincidence? You followed her just to know about what she does and her activities, and she does not follow you. Is that because of a system that they have? They are not permitted to follow us as Palestinians. And the other question is about the 1 2-state solution. If I'm giving another chance to ask, I'll ask you about it. Finished.
Well, thank you, Naima. This is a very interesting idea, actually. I've never thought about it, I must say. The idea of tweeting in Hebrew. I have nothing against it in principle, but maybe I would do that if I was in Palestine serving as, a public relations officer or serving as a key contact with the Israeli public. But as an ambassador to the United Kingdom, my main audience is not the Israeli people. My main audience is the British people. So it's about mandate, really, and it's about your brief, your exact. But some of my colleagues back home in Palestine, they do use Hebrew to address. They even speak Hebrew in some interviews with Israeli media. I don't know Hebrew. I haven't studied Hebrew, unfortunately, so it's not my strength. As for Israeli ambassador here, I follow the Israeli ambassador here. I follow the Israeli ambassador in Washington. And I have notification. Yes, because they are the other side, and I want to know exactly what they say, what they do. This is not an acknowledgement or an endorsement in any way or form. This is just me following, yes, their activities. Part of my job here is to make sure that I am well aware of what they do. So it's not a statement in any form or shape. And the fact that she's not following me means that, maybe she's interested somewhere else. I'm interested in their work, not in her. And I want to see if any of their work, any of their statements is accurate or not, must be rebuffed or not. So this is part of what I do on a regular basis, Naima. And the job of a Palestinian diplomat is really, really not easy, because you could build incrementally, slowly, a block over a block, and then in one go things can wash out and bring you back to point zero in many files. So you must be alert, absolutely alert all the time. Information is key, and part of that is the social media. And if you noticed, I'm relatively active in the social media, because I think it's such an effective tool to reach as many audience as possible. Where are you from, Naima, in Palestine?
From
Huh?
Originally, I come from Hamama.
Hamama, yeah. So you were born in Gaza?
Yeah, I was born in Gaza.
Oh, God bless you. Ana kaman, I was born in Gaza as well. I was born in Rafah, to the very south of the Gaza Strip. I was born in a refugee camp, so we are neighbors.
Yeah, I'm from Gaza City, on the other side, in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and you are from Al-Shabura. I think I did everything about you, by the way.
I am from Shabura. And you are in the UK now? You are in London now, or you are doing this online?
Yeah, I'm in London.
You must come and visit us when the Corona thing is behind us.
I will.
Well done, Professor Brown. Yani, a wonderful lady from Gaza. It couldn't be better. Really, it couldn't be better.
Well, as I say, we tried to have a genuinely international student body. So, I think it makes life more interesting, not only for those who attend, but also for students to interact with others as well, to have such a mixed community. Some other questions from the floor about the ambassador's work, or indeed other aspects. Chiara, would you like to ask something?
Yes. Hi, Ambassador. My question is more focused on your economic background or your background in economy. Does that affect your interest in London currently? So like your economic or Palestine's economic or commercial interest in London and in the UK, since London is, one of the financial capitals of the world. Does that have any interest in your work here?
It does, actually, it does. And when I first arrived to London, I had the economic file as a key file. And actually, Palestine was the second country in the world to sign a bilateral agreement with the United Kingdom just before Brexit. Because I pushed for it, and I believe that, we also want to focus on the well-being of our people on the ground. The economic situation is not less important than the political, and both are interlinked, as you know very well. And the first few months of my arrival, just before Corona hits, was primarily also trying to leverage that and to link sectors together. We started with the tourism, because tourism is a major sector in Palestine, with all the historic sites in Bethlehem and Jerusalem and elsewhere, and Jericho. But regrettably, the coronavirus did not allow us to proceed in that direction with all the lockdowns. But more than the virus itself, the occupation virus back home also is the most restrictive side. And I must tell you, no matter what we do and no matter how we try to focus on the economic side, the dynamics on the situation does not allow us. And this is not by way of complaining. This is by way of actually describing the situation. What is economics in general? Economics is about your ability to manage your resources and fair distribution on your population, given how scarce your resources are and how unlimited the demands are. This is, in a nutshell, very simplistic way. And for that, you need several policy tools to do that distribution and that management of the wealth and the income and what have you. And these tools include your ability to trade with other parties, i.e. you have a control over your borders, which we don't. My friend, we don't. Israel is in full control of these borders, and unfortunately, it is a heinous process to export or import. If you are interested in this file, I can send you some details. The second tool is what we call in economics, fiscal policy, which is primarily to try and build, the stimulus. So you stimulate the economy, as the British government is doing now, building new roads. Every road is closed. It's a way to throw in cash in the economy to revitalize the economy, which Obama used in 2008. Was a huge stimulus package. In economics, that's fiscal policy. We can't, because we cannot even build a small little road to connect, because much of these areas are colonized by illegal settlements, and these settlements are increasing by the day as we speak. And the West Bank has turned into a Swiss cheese, and the holes in that cheese is the Palestinian towns now. It's not even the settlements. The settlements are becoming big towns. A third policy tool is the monetary policy, which is the control of your central bank, interest rate, the printing of money, all that. And we don't have a central bank, unfortunately, until now. We only rely on the Israeli central bank, which is not good. I don't want to go much. It does not produce policies for our sake, or policies that would serve our economy. To the contrary, and we are having many problems in the monetary arena. For instance, we have billions of Israeli shekels in cash in our banks, which every day they depreciate in value. So we are yielding a cost, and we are unable to send them back because of these military occupation-like policies. And I'm not going to go on in this. Internal trade. Naimi can tell you more, that it's almost impossible to export and import between the West Bank and Gaza, which is the one territory. It's one territory. You cannot import and export. It's easier for Gaza to send its product to China than it's sending its products to Ramallah or to Bethlehem or to Hebron. And it's only like less than 45 minutes drive between Gaza and the West Bank. Actually, between Gaza and Hebron, it's 20 minutes car drive. So the internal situation, my friend, and sorry I took my time to answer this, really does not really allow us and qualify the situation of a true structural economic development. And when we sign agreements with third countries like the UK, and when we try to implement these free trade agreements, etc., we are faced with the challenge of how do we implement it? Because in the end, the country that is in full charge of the trade, of the customs, of everything is Israel, not us. So we sign agreements, we promote investment, and then we bring a group of investors, as I did, and they go, and then they are interested. They see value in this, they see interest, they see profitability. And we do, by the way, we have a very young, talented society, very well trained. You know, by the way, do you know Palestine has one of the highest, not one, the highest PhD per capita graduates worldwide? So we have a very educated society. Our illiteracy rate is zero. And it's a very young society. Look at Naima. She will be a next ambassador for us, hopefully, in Washington and London as well. But many others of her generation really wanting to invest in the human capital. Her and her family, who were kicked out of their homes originally in 48. Hamami is next to where my town was also ethnically cleansed in 1948. I come from a town called Simsim. My father was born there. Both Hamami means, by the way, a bird, or a pigeon. So she symbolizes, Naima symbolizes peace, because pigeon is a symbol of peace. But all these villages were ethnically cleansed in 1948, and then her family, my family, went to Gaza. As a result, I was born in a refugee camp. Now, this has deprived the Palestinian people their material base, because if you lose your land and you lose your resources, you need to build it again. That's why it is crucial before we send investors. And then when the investors want to invest, they discover that their fate, their destiny, everything is controlled by Israel, they backtrack. So that's why, regrettably, our focus is more in trying to find a political solution, and at the same time trying to mitigate the economic hardship by increasing the aid. So we focus now with the UK government and other governments on aid. Only yesterday I had a meeting with the Foreign Office to make sure that UNRWA, which is the UN agency responsible for providing services to Palestinian refugees until they exercise their right of return and they achieve their internationally granted rights. In the meantime, UNRWA is in charge of providing services for them. We make sure that the UK provide sufficient aid to UNRWA, sufficient aid to various organizations until we find a political solution.
So I'm just going to jump in there very quickly. Given that and I have to get used to saying this now, the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office, as they've changed their name recently, has been slashing sort of support and development abroad. Has there been any reduction in British support for the Palestinian Authority announced in the last few days, weeks?
Well, only yesterday, we had a serious crisis, Martin. The UK has been principled over the last few years, especially during the Trump time. They have remained committed for their long-held policy of a two states, 1967 borders, Jerusalem being the capital of the two sides, resolving the issue of refugees. They did not change. And we commended them for that. Yet yesterday we had a crisis. The UK ambassador in Geneva voted against our resolutions that included basic resolutions, because like the right of self-determination, settlements are illegal, because the UK is against the mechanism, which is called Item 7 in the UN Human Rights Council. And the UK says that this Item 7 signals Israel out. Now, of course, we disagree. This is not a resolution about Israel. It's about the occupied territories. And there was a severe crisis. I was on the phone and sent very harsh letters. So that's why I was saying to Naima earlier that you build and you accumulate, and then one hit, it brings you back to point zero. It's almost like diplomacy is a very harsh business. Your success is measured by millimeter, and your failure is immediately in miles. There is discussions. They explain that they are absolutely for all these resolutions, and they vote for them in the UN General Assembly, which is true. But they are specifically against this mechanism in the UN Human Rights Council. We are working with them now to resolve it. But you see, here is a lesson in diplomacy. Okay, we know that. I was engaging them before the voting. They gave me positive promises, by the way, but regrettably, in the last second, there was a political intervention at the highest level for them to vote no in protest of the mechanism. Fine, but now the focus is to make sure that this does not happen again. But the most significant part of this is that I told them this yesterday, is it doesn't come out like the UK is opposing item 7 on principle of the UN Security, of the UN Human Rights Council. It comes out in the news, the UK voted against the Palestinian people of self-determination. And this is very damaging to the UK, its standing, its reputation. And of course, it has no morality, no legality, no historic responsibility. In the end, it was the UK who's created all this mess in the 1917, the Balfour Declaration. They are personally, and I mean particularly responsible for the mess we are in, for the injury we have, and adding, and these words were delivered to them yesterday, adding such salt into this deep injury by the country that has created our situation was very immoral and very, and we could have resolved it. So from time to time, Martin, we have crises. We have serious, and yesterday it was a crisis. And as we speak, I'm now writing an official letter of protest to the Foreign Secretary that will really be very straightforward and carry strong words. Because, okay, you build the relationship, but in no way you allow for that relationship to go back years in time, only because of a political calculation. And we know that I can't mention what happened, but we know who intervened. We know who intervened. So this is not what the UK wants. This is the UK caving under some lobby and pressure. And, you know, I think this does not only damage our standing, but it damages the UK as it leaves the EU and its standings as a guarantor of international law. It is the UK that always says that it wants to be a champion of the rules-based international order. And we keep telling them this isn't about Palestine only. This is about the kind of the world you want to see, and it's about the legality of our interaction. If we lose this order that we have created after the Second World War, if it is subjected only for your narrow political calculations, there will be the role of the jungle. You know, then it will be the next Netanyahu in the world who wants to annex territory and wants to colonize territory and wants to subjugate. And he thinks, or she thinks, that they can get away with it because you could be lobbied, you could be pressured, you could be blackmailed. So regrettably, it isn't just a nice talk with public like this and discussions. There is a lot that happens in the life of a diplomat and in the life of a representative. It's ups and downs all the time. Yet the best times I have is when I interact with real people like you.
On which note, some more questions from the floor, perhaps. Would anyone else have any other questions or queries they would like to ask? I'm sure there's plenty of things we can ask about. Naima, do you want to have? I'm sure you have another question up your sleeve, and you'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay.
Actually, I have a question regarding the vision that the PLO has regarding the end of the Israeli occupation and the possibilities for achieving peace between us and the Israeli occupation. What Abbas always says is that we need a Palestinian state to be recognized as a Palestinian state on the 1967 land with the eastern part of Jerusalem as the capital city of ours. Does that guarantee our right of return for me and you to get back to Simsim and Hamama? It doesn't. So why does the PLO it has been working the hardest to get that solution, as if it is the only one that we have. Regarding the being pragmatic and the practicality of this solution, I think what has been happening has no sign to show that it is possible to be achieved. Why not to have the PLO move from that vision and a warm peace, post the thing of the nation and the conflict, what is called as a conflict. Why not to for instance, to endorse the one-state solution that guarantees our full meaning of human rights and at the same time it gives Israel what it wants, you know, except for that thing building a Jewish state on Israel. Well, how do you think about this?
Did you broke up slightly there in the middle, Naima? Did you get that, Ambassador? Did you get the question?
Yes, I got it. Yes, I got it, Naima, and I know this is a key discussion among your generation and among many of our friends worldwide, and one state or two states. Number one, I think it's not the right discussion because it assumes that Israel is ready for a solution, but we have picked the wrong solution. I don't think this is the situation, unfortunately, Naima. I think Israel is interested neither in a two-state solution. Israel, as we know it now, the current political dynamics, neither in a two-state solution nor in a one-state solution. The current government, at least since 1997, is interested only in the greater Israel project, i.e. colonizing the rest of historic Palestine, as is happening. And I'm sure you're following only in the last year, 2020, Israel has already announced and built 12,000 new settlement units. It has doubled the house demolitions in the West Bank. So the real project on the ground that is happening on a daily basis is the project of turning the situation into a greater Israel project, of turning the situation, as the Beit Salem Israeli human rights organization published only last month, it's turning the situation into a full-fledged apartheid as in a segregation system. So frankly, it's a luxury to discuss one state and two states when the situation on the ground is so bad and is going in that direction. That's number one. Number two, the two-state solution, Naima, was never a Palestinian demand. This is not our demand. The two-state solution was an international demand. It was the world, the UN Security Council, who demanded from us that we recognize their international resolutions to create two states in an attempt to resolve the conflict. So the two-state solution was actually a Palestinian concession, if you may, to ally ourselves with international resolutions, with international law. And we have gone a long journey in making sure that we continue and we remain part of the international legality, international legitimacy, no matter how bleak sometimes the situation can become, as I described to you only yesterday and the voting by the UK. Anyway, our resolutions have passed overwhelmingly. It was only the UK who went astray, but our resolutions went ahead. Thirdly, you think, Israel will, Israel is so obsessed about the demographic factor. You think Israel will ever, it's a non-starter in Israel, the idea of one state whereby democracy will rule. I would love to see an egalitarian, democratic, open, transparent state. I would love to go and live in Haifa. I love Haifa is my favorite city. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous. It's on the coast, and it's the reconciliation, the coexistence of Haifa, the culture of Haifa, the intellectual space. I have many friends there. So I wouldn't mind a one-state solution. But, the idea that one day a Palestinian like you runs the Israeli-Palestinian elections and become the president or the prime minister will not be a starter in the current Israeli mindset. No way. No way. They will not allow for a situation like this, let alone. So our strength, so far until this moment, our strength is in what we have accumulated and where we have achieved, which is an international consensus, international law, international resolutions, and the investment on the ground. Also, think about the moment you call for a one state without really realizing it, without achieving it, without having a progress towards it. You will immediately legitimize settlements. You will immediately legalize settlements. And then you might actually jump in the air without having achieved anything, and then contribute to Netanyahu's real program of actually having a greater Israel project. So We need to be careful now. The two-state solution does not exclude to have an arrangement whereby we live openly, we have no borders. In fact, the two-state solution could be the best entry point into an arrangement whereby people can live freely anywhere, that we will have virtual borders, not real borders. But for now, what is slowing Israel's appetite for territory, for colonization, for subjugation, is the clarity of international position. For now, it is the clarity of the investment on the ground. So our power is in there. If we lose our power without having an alternative, I think the net result would be against our interests. Yeah, Naeem. So we need to think about this in a cold-headed way, calculate the cost and the benefit, and make sure that every move we take us towards our final goals. It does not deviate from that goal.
Okay, thank you. Regina, you have a question?
Hi, Ambassador. Thank you for being here today. I get all of your tweets. I'm one of your followers on Twitter. And so I have two questions. One being, I know you said that only over like 140 plus countries recognize Palestine. In your opinion, I just want to know, what do you think are like some of the concrete things that need to happen in order for Palestine to be recognized? My second question is, being here in the U.S., I run into a lot of people that really don't understand the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and they really don't understand what caused it. It seems like it started way before even the Bible. But just wanting to know if you could just kind of summarize maybe some of the events that occurred in your understanding that actually started the conflict.
Thank you, Regina, and I must follow you back. I'll look up your and following you back will not be like following the Israeli ambassador. I will not be trying to get information, but will retweet yours. 140 countries is more than 2/3 of the world. Our key issue is with a handful of countries, primarily in Western Europe, because even Eastern Europe have recognized this from the Soviet Union time. Eastern Europe, North America, and some of the countries in that galaxy, i.e. Australia, etc. That's it. This is the region of the world that does not recognize. But key countries like Russia, China, do recognize the state of Palestine. And your question is, what is stopping these countries? I think it's primarily political expediency and cowardice. And I may want to be very straightforward and not mince my word and sound like a diplomat. It's sheer cowardice because nothing would serve the cause of peace more than recognition. Nothing. Because nothing hurt the cause of peace in the last 30, 40 years more than the lack of clarity about international commitment. So the world has recognized one state in these two states, yet the world says they want to see a two-state outcome. And by recognizing one state and not the other, it was almost taken by Israel as a license to encroach into the other state territory, which has been happening all along. That's number one. Number two, not only for the cause of peace, it's a Palestinian right. I mean, we are not asking for a favor, Regina. We are a nation, very rooted, very historic, very ancient. We are on our land, yes, occupied, but it is on our land. We have declared a state. We have a government that is recognized by the world, which is the PLO. We are recognized by the United Nations. Now we are a state since 2012 in the UN. So it is our right that to be recognized. It is not in any way or form. Thirdly, it is a responsibility by the international community, including the United Kingdom. I mean, according to international law, Palestine is a state. You call for it to be state. So every day you wait for not recognizing is a day of actually advancing the project of non-solution, as we described earlier, the Greater Israel project. We talk to the British officials all the time here, regularly, and at the very high level about the issue of recognition. And we tell them, what is your logic? What is holding you? You, every single morning, say you support fully two-state solution. You have invested billions of dollars and pounds in building the structures for the Palestinian state to come. We believe you when you say this is the only way forward, not only for the sake of Palestinians, but also Israelis. So what is holding you? And they would say, oh, we want to choose the right moment. It would be beneficial when we do it just after a final agreement has reached. So it's a part of a process. And we tell them, stop this nonsense. If you really want to do it after a final agreement, why did you then recognize Israel? Why don't you wait for a final agreement and then you recognize the two states? Because if you recognize one state, then you are not leveling the field. And then that one state will always negotiate fundamentals, not modalities, because it's recognized, the other side is not recognized. So it will always discuss fundamentals, i.e. they will not accept the international resolutions. They want to have more of the West Bank and Gaza. They want to eat up more of the land, more of the resources, which is happening in an unprecedented level. Annexation, by the way, is happening on a daily basis. And then we go on, Regina, about this recognition with the UK side, saying, okay, we know it's very difficult for you to de-recognize Israel. This is not easy. So what we are calling for you is recognize the other state that you call for and you support and sponsor. Recognize the state of Palestine. Then you immediately level the field. And recognition must be an entry point to the peace process, not an outcome of it. Because this is the best message to the Israeli public, to the settler movement, to the Kahanist movement, to everybody involved, that actually countries like the United Kingdom, with all of its international weight, are serious about the two-state solution. This is not just lip service that we receive all the time. There is political capital invested. We have a lot of support by the parliament, some quarters of the government. We are pushing in that direction, Regina, a lot pushing in that direction. But unfortunately, the United Kingdom has missed many great opportunities. Only in the last decade, last 10 years, they have missed 3 key opportunities to do just that. The first one was in 2012 when we went to the General Assembly for recognition of the state of Palestine in the UN system. The world voted for us. We became a state. Unfortunately, the UK abstained. That was such a missed opportunity. The UK could have been part of that world, part of that moment. Abstention was a very missed opportunity. The second was 2014 when the UK Parliament voted overwhelmingly to recognize the state of Palestine, both Conservatives and Labour and all other parties. That was such a moment for the UK government to take cover from the Parliament, and the Parliament is not an NGO. The Parliament is the political manifestation of the will of the British people. These are the political representatives, the elected. So when they deliver a verdict and a vote in the Parliament overwhelmingly to recognize, then it is the British people's verdict and the British people's will to do so. And they missed it. They didn't implement it. And The third was 2017, and that was 100 years since the infamous Balfour Declaration. 100 years. And that was such an opportunity to say, okay, we now mark 100 years of the Balfour Declaration. We have Israel created. It's a strong state, strong economy, strong military. But we have unfinished business since the Balfour Declaration, which is the people of Palestine and the rights of the people of Palestine and the state of Palestine. And we take this 100 years, century, you call it, 100 years, century, whatever. We call this 100, we use this 100 years as an occasion to recognize the state of Palestine. That was missed. So now we're telling them, don't miss another opportunity that is around the corner. And try your best to actually make sure that we don't, in the end, lose your own call for a two-state solution. Because if we do, as Naimi said, Naimi represents a growing Palestinian public. Many of our youth are saying, you know what? They don't want to implement two states. We have accepted 22% of our home, 22% of our land, what was originally ours. We have accepted to establish a state on these 22%. By the way, the West Bank and Gaza, including East Jerusalem, is 22% of historic Palestine. And Netanyahu and his likes are eating up that 22% every day. So you know what? We're going to go for an anti-apartheid movement. We're going to go for civil rights. We are in numbers more than them. And okay, let it take another 50 years, but we will have to rule our entire, homeland because, numbers speak for themselves. I don't want another generation or two to face the fate of my generation or the generations before me. I would want to see a solution much earlier than this. I would want to see a solution within the coming year or two. And I think a compromise is possible. And I think the two-state solution is the compromise. And I think there is so much between us and them that will create a potential, because we have such a talented young generation. They have a very high-tech society. We could do it together. But this way of Netanyahu of wanting to just, have everything and have the cake and eat it and be so clever, too clever, wanting to just make peace with Emirates. Okay, good luck. I mean, we know all these are transactional. It's not going to get you anywhere. And there was never war between you and Emirates. You spoke, Martin, about normalization. I mean, and then you go around and you say Israel is making peace. Israel is not making peace. Israel is avoiding peace. Israel is avoiding peace. Israel is saying to its constituencies that here you see we now can travel to Dubai and we can do business in Dubai without actually having made peace with the Palestinians. No, the Palestinian issue is what matters. We are there on our land. We are growing. We are more than 14 million people worldwide now, including in Palestine. Israel knows very well that we are the problem and the solution is with we. And like an ostrich, trying to hide your head under the sand is not going to do. I took my time to answer your question about recognition because I really think it's a key policy failure of the West. It's a key policy failure, and I'm not so sure anymore if the West is serious and mean it. And if so, I'm afraid London will have to become the capital of the anti-apartheid movement against the Israeli apartheid, not more than 2 or 3 years from now. I assure you, and read my lips. Because London was the center of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. London is very strong, i.e. the UK, in the trade unions. I am meeting the trade unions on a daily basis. The TUC, the Trade Union Congress, which is the umbrella of all the British trade unions, took a motion, voted for a motion only last year, describing Israel as an apartheid regime. So we are going in that direction. What we are telling the British government, you know what? Invest a bit of political capital, not only in the recognition, by the way, to save us from that long journey. The book of Nelson Mandela, I'm sure your professor read it, Long Journey to Freedom. Save us from another long journey. The two-state solution was already a long journey, 70 years. Save us another 70 years. And let's do this practically. And this requires recognition, we tell the British government. This requires banning illegal trade and illegal settlement products. You must ban it. What do you mean? When you say, we label these products, you don't label the ivory. Ivory is illegal. You don't, when a commodity is illegal, produced in a stolen land from stolen resources, you don't label it, you ban it. And we also ask the British government to support our quest for accountability at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and to show leadership and to show bravery in ensuring that international legality will apply. Enough. I mean, we want international legality to apply not only on Israel, on us, the Palestinian people, on everywhere. Keeping Israel above the law, having Israel enjoy this culture of impunity, neither helps Israel nor helps us. And lastly, what was your other question? I already took my time on the first question, Regina. But your second question was about many people who doesn't understand the situation. Listen, Regina, this has nothing to do with the Bible, and God is innocent of all this. This has nothing to do with religions, including Islam, Christianity, Judaism, are there to actually spread love, reconciliation. You will find every text possible in all these religions that would invite people to coexist, to respect each other. And and I always in the center of my head, always the saying in Islam, that translates into that we created you nations so you unite and you know each other and you intermarry even from each other. The same goes for Christianity and Judaism. So this isn't about that. This is about political forces that were created in the 19th century that used religions all across, by the way, not only in Israel, that used religion for a political ideology. This political ideology is Zionism, and this political ideology claimed that the land of Palestine was given to them by God. Now, let me tell you, God is not a state agent. He does not distribute land. Okay, and God does not love one people and hate other people, or separate or distinguish, or between his children. God love all. I don't speak on his behalf, but I can claim that God love all of his children. So it's a political ideology, and this political ideology exists everywhere. This is a colonial project, Regina. It's a colonial project that started in the in the late 19th century, that brought many people to Palestine, regardless of the claims. Now, stuff happened as a result of that colonial project and the United Kingdom intervention of promising that political ideology, Zionism, a country in my homeland, in Palestine, in 1917, the Balfour Declaration, written, very few words that have brought so much havoc upon my nation. As a result, Britain took mandate of Palestine by the UN. It was entrusted by the UN. It went to the UN to seek mandate of Palestine, the imperial era. And Britain worked actively to actually allow for that political ideology, Zionism, to materialize in Palestine. So it is the cooperation of political ideologies and imperialism at the time, i.e. the United Kingdom and the superpowers, that allowed this to happen. As a result, in the 30s, there was the Great Strike and the Great Revolution by the Palestinian people at the time against all this immigration, the British power control of Palestine, allowing this to happen under our, and there were many Palestinians killed by the British authorities, imprisoned by the British authorities. There were many curfews imposed by Britain to curb the Palestinian revolution in the 30s, and as a result, by the 40s, Israel, or the militias at the time, there was no Israel, Haganah and Irgun, were able to ethnically cleanse Naima's parents from her village, my parents from my village, and there was a massive ethnic cleansing that actually paved the way for Israel to declare itself. And since then, we have more than 6 million refugees, including myself, and since then, we have the rest of the West Bank occupied in 1967 borders. So please don't confuse the narrative with religion or with God or with text or all that. This is a straightforward political ideology that found partners in the international arena. And while the UK is no longer now the straight benefactor of Israel, it's now the US that is doing that role. The United States is providing Israel with all the support, military and what have you. So this is a political issue. It is a legal issue. It isn't a religious issue. It isn't a narrative issue. It's just a legal issue. And because it's very complicated in the narrative sense, the best way is that, both people would just find their way to express their self-determination, their nationhood, their sovereignty. And that's why the world, and together with us, still think that, okay, let's give the two sides what they seek the most and end this conflict once and for all. However, the power of the force, the excess of the power, keeps pushing them in the territory of a zero sum, keeps telling them they can have more and more and more and more, and we are stuck there all the time. And there is such a narrative, Regina, this is the last thing, that we have been the one who never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, i.e. we are the rejectionist, we always reject. This is part of the spin and the propaganda. No, it's our party that has actually signed the Oslo Accords, despite the fact Oslo did not have anything of substance. It was just an interim agreement towards the hope that in 5 years' time, Oslo was signed in 1993, in 5 years' time, a final agreement would have been reached. Only 2 years after signing the agreement, Yasser Arafat going back to Palestine, recognizing the state of Israel in writing, Yasser Arafat. Towards that end of eventually creating a state of Palestine, Rabin was assassinated by a fanatical Israeli citizen, Yigal Amir, and everything was derailed since then. So please, whenever you are faced with discussions about this, do not allow people to quote for you God or religion or Bibles, or quote from the book of colonialism and the book of imperialism, my friend.
Thank you. Yes, I will put up some links. I think one of the most useful books I've read recently, and I had to just double check his name, is by Professor Rashid Khalidi.
Yes.
And his book, The 100 Years War on Palestine, is very, very useful here for giving sort of a background. But it is interesting that we keep talking about narratives and control of narratives. And while you were talking, I'm constantly thinking of the rival narratives here in Estonia between the Estonians and Russians. And of course, recognition and continued recognition as well is an issue here, as it has been in many other places. So these are key issues. And we can talk more about recognition, things like that in the class afterwards, and we can go into it. I mentioned it briefly in the last lecture. But we can. And I'm very conscious of time, and I see that the ambassador's getting phone calls as well. But any other questions from the floor? Would anyone else like to ask Teresa? Was that a hand up?
Yes, that was me. Hi, Ambassador. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us. I had a question. I've been following your tweets about the COVID-19 vaccine situation. And Israel's claiming a very successful vaccine campaign, but they've completely neglected Gaza and the West Bank, and I'm sure a lot of other places as well. And I wondered what you thought the role of diplomacy is in this issue, and because I know it's also an economic issue, which is your background as well. I wonder if you had anything to say about that.
The economic? I'm sorry, I didn't get the last sentence.
Sorry, I was asking what you thought the role of diplomacy is in this COVID-19 vaccine situation between Israel and Palestine.
Yeah. Well, the vaccine situation also reveals for you all that you need to know, my friend, and this is a very relevant question to just indicate for you where things are going. I mean, this was a global pandemic. It has affected everybody. Israel, with its very good relations, has managed to secure the vaccination before any other country, and has been the first worldwide to start the rolling out of the vaccination. Good, excellent. But while it was doing that and started to do that, it has really revealed the ugliness, the racism, the structural discrimination that is happening in Palestine. So it started with its citizens, which is also understood, but it has a legal responsibility under international law to provide vaccinations for the people under its own control. Legal responsibility. And of course, moral as well. Add to that, it doesn't make sense that you vaccinate your illegal settlers in the West Bank and then 20 meters away, the Palestinian people who are under your military control. Doesn't make sense because, you know, if you don't vaccinate everybody, then your vaccination is not really effective. It's not just illegality and morality and responsibility. It is also, you know, common sense. And that, regrettably, what we described as vaccine apartheid has been, vivid in the last few months and in the last few weeks. That describes the ugliness of the situation. Anyway, this is why we just want to get rid of all this. We don't want Israel to be responsible in our faith. I mean, get off our back. We can vaccinate our people. Just get now we are coordinating, you know, some shipments to arrive to Palestine. We will have to coordinate it with the Israeli government and authorities and occupying forces. And will they allow it through Amman and Jordan, or will they allow it through I don't know where? It's a mess, even to adhere to or to respect our responsibility. Anyway. There was a lot of public exposure about this issue in the UK. The Guardian wrote about it. The Independent wrote about it. Many, even the, other mainstream newspapers, like the Telegraph, has really exposed Israel like never before. I mean, because the issue of vaccination has nothing to do with narratives, going back to Regina, or with political disputes. I mean, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And then you are sending thousands of vaccines to countries as way of political favors? Political favors? You send to some small Eastern European countries The vaccine, so that you get them to move their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This is political corruption. This is moral corruption. This is Netanyahu. This is Netanyahu, who's been accused by his own courts and his own political system of grand corruption. So unfortunately, yet again, the Israeli government political system has used the vaccination in the most awful way possible that you can imagine in this arena. What do we do now? We have received the first batch from COVAX, which is the international system. We rolled out the first vaccination primarily for the elders, the most exposed, and to the health workers. And we have agreed with AstraZeneca to provide us with 2 million, and we paid for it. We're just waiting for its delivery. Unfortunately, it was delayed. We were supposed to get the delivery 2 weeks ago, first week of March. It's delayed because the world is engaging in a war against the vaccination and against it's very complicated. So we're waiting for also our own order to arrive, and we will vaccinate our own people. But this vaccination saga has indicated for us beyond doubt the sheer, pure, crude racism that exists in Israel.
Any other questions? And again, I'm very conscious of your generosity of your time, Ambassador. Naima, do you have another question? We can't hear you or see you, Naima. Are you having connection problems at your end?
Yeah. Is it okay now?
We can hear you. We can hear you. We can hear you. So if you want to ask your question.
Okay. Actually, my question is based on what I asked before. It's about the Palestinian leadership and what it endorses. You know, during the ongoing denial of the Palestinian people's rights and the Israeli crimes, why not to have the Palestinian leadership put a deadline for what it has been endorsing regarding the 1-2-state solution? Why not to move to another? Okay, we know that recognition is one of the tools that we need in order to be able to achieve at least cold peace at the beginning, and then work on positive or warm peace, as I don't know, I can't remember who called it. Okay, and the second thing is about the consistency and inconsistency of our leadership. This is a central point because, for instance, Mandela, Luther King, they were all consistent in terms of their rights and the people's rights. They said that we want the full meaning of human rights and kept on working on that, despite, you know, being offered the Bantustan solution, for instance. For Mandela, he refused that because it did not guarantee the full meaning of human rights. Why did Arafat recognize Israel at the beginning and had the PLO get recognized? This is not, you know, it's at one of the stages, but it became later, it became the goal. And then he recognized 242. And declared independence of, this is not an independence in 1982, as I can remember, on 15th of November. This, you know, it's nonsense. I think it did not, you know, bring anything to us. What do you think, Zomlot?
Yeah, thank you, Naima. Yeah, I think, you know, this is an internal discussion about internal Palestinian politics. And it's very legitimate, and we should have it among ourselves. But in general, the Palestinian leadership, I must say, have been consistent from Yasser Arafat all the way to now. Have been very consistent in being absolutely principled and committed to the two-state solution. This is where the PLO has found a national majority and a national equilibrium. And they haven't changed. They haven't changed. What keeps changing, unfortunately, is the Israeli dynamics and keep shifting the goalposts. But our goalpost has remained where it is for at least the last 30, 40 years. I agree with you that the recognition of the State of Israel by us, by the PLO, without having a reciprocal recognition, needed more thinking at the time. We shouldn't have done it without achieving a mutual recognition, i.e. we recognize the state of Israel and Israel recognize the state of Palestine, and then we begin the negotiation of how do we draw the borders and do the modalities. You're absolutely right. That was a mistake, and I recognize that mistake. But that mistake was done in good faith by Yasser Arafat and our leadership at the time, thinking that in a few years' time, as per the agreements we signed, there will be a state, it will be recognized, and maybe we should be generous. The Arab culture, be generous and just give that very good hint at the beginning that we are really serious about it, and we shall recognize you in writing as a state on the 1967 borders. Consistency is a very important thing in politics and in national politics particularly. I agree with you. Nelson Mandela has inspired his people and many people around the world. But do not undermine how much Palestine and the Palestinian people and the Palestinian leadership and the revolution, especially since 1965, have also inspired millions of the people around the world. While Nelson Mandela's issue was with a group of colonial power that has built that very awful apartheid regime, our issue is much bigger. Every situation is different than the other situation. I need you to realize that. It doesn't mean that our issue is more difficult or less difficult. It's just different. It's just different. And the tools we need to use and the narrative, the discourse we apply has got to be different. But if you go anywhere in the world and show the picture of Yasser Arafat, even a child now will tell you this is Yasser Arafat. So we have done mistakes. We need to learn from these mistakes. But overall, I think, we have managed to avert being the Red Indians of the region, i.e. to disappear. We didn't disappear. We are on our land. We are growing. We are teaching our kids, educating ourselves, and we are growing. Naimi, remember that I'm so proud that a girl of your age, young age, from Gaza is being part of this very prestigious program of Richmond University by Martin Brown, Professor Brown, who I hear about him and their work. This tells you a lot. This tells me what I need to know. The plan for any colonial power is to get rid of the native population. In 1948, they didn't. Okay, some of us had to go to the West Bank and Gaza, like you and I and my parents, but some remained in their land in what became Israel in 48. Now these people are now around 2 million. The Palestinian citizens of Israel are 2 million strong. Okay, this election, they were not as united as last elections. Last elections, they achieved 15 seats in the Knesset. That was the third biggest bloc in the Israeli Knesset. This time they were divided relatively, but they still scored some good seats. These people are there defending their culture. They are Palestinians, Christians and Muslims. You have in the West Bank roughly around 4 million people, roughly speaking, 3 in the West Bank and Jerusalem, 2 in Gaza. So plus the 2 million inside Israel, you're talking about 7 million. 7 million Palestinians on our land as we speak. On our land, and not any Palestinians. And let me brag here, not any Palestinians. We are not just any, we are very rooted, cultured. We know our history. We know where we're going. You have another 7 million outside in the diaspora and the refugees worldwide. We ain't going anywhere, Naim. Ain't going anywhere. The most important thing is that we continue living on our land. We continue presenting ourselves as a nation that is united, have one political system. I am so excited that we will have elections only in 2 months' time by the 22nd of May. That will bring Gaza and the West Bank together again in this situation between Fatah and Hamas, bring back, renew the political legitimacy of the political system, renew the democratic process. And while today is very bleak, it is bleak. One can rarely see a light at the end of any tunnel. And there are so many tunnels, it's not even one tunnel. I understand. But the moment the colonizer failed to finish off the colonized, it's a matter of time when the colonized regain their freedom, their land. This is the history of Nelson Mandela. This is the history of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in the US. This is the history of Mahatma Gandhi and India and the British Empire, imperialism. This is the history of every nation. This is the history of Algeria and France. There were more than 500,000 French settlers in Algeria. So I just want you to keep that faith and keep that hope, and make sure that as much as we are principled in our narrative and belief, we are also, as much as we are principled and strong, we are also flexible in understanding the world, understanding how it ticks, in being flexible enough, compromising, because in the end, absolute justice might be, the best thing to achieve, but it will come at a huge price. It's better to go for relative justice. And relative justice means you will have to find a win-win situation. Even if others have wronged you, have done wrong things, you will have to find a win-win situation. And I believe with a bit of international seriousness and work and continuation of our resistance on the ground by peaceful means and our building of our national institutions, we will reach that moment one day. I'm saying this, Professor, because I must go.
Yes, I was kept looking at the clock. You've been very generous with your time, Ambassador. Thank you very much for joining us. And do please, Nina has my email, so do please reach out if there's anything I can do. Send me an email. Thank you very much for coming to see us. A round of applause for everyone for thank you. And we usually wave as well. I'm very keen on waving at the end. So, I mean, it's just a little exercise. But thank you very much for your time, Ambassador. And it's good to end on a note of optimism there, I think. Partial, perhaps, but optimism nevertheless. Thank you very much for your time. And I hope we'll be able to repeat this in future, perhaps sometime.
I look forward, Professor. Good luck and see you soon.
Thank you. We can stay online if you want, just have a bit of a debrief. And I've been taking some notes, and I can give you some references to some other materials that I put up on Twitter as well. I mentioned